When children are removed from their homes because of abuse and neglect, it's because of extreme abuse and neglect. And these children have been traumatized. When we take them into our system of care, that's when we start re-traumatizing them, and that's the beginning of their life in care.
The trauma they experience going through a system where they're taken from abusive situations and then sexually abused, physically abused by their caretakers, the people that are supposed to care for them.
For 3 years, the foster care system put my family and our children through a living hell.
I honestly don't think anyone deserves to be treated like that, because really what me and my sisters went through, it was torture. We were tortured.
You don't feel like a kid, you just feel like an outcast.
If you really go through it, it kind of feels like they're kidnapping you in the middle of the night. They're putting you in a home that you don't know anybody, and they isolate you from your family members, and you're alone. And then they expect you to become normal when there's nothing normal about it. You can't go out, talk to people. You can't go out and have fun with friends. You're literally on an island by yourself. And then they expect you to perform and function like a normal person.
All of us felt like we were criminals. We're being disciplined for something that our parents did.
In 1996, Florida lawmakers decided to experiment with privatizing the foster care system and began giving large amounts of money to 5 test programs throughout the state. In Duval and Clay County, the Family Service Coalition was given $9.5 million. In Escambia County, Children's Home Society was given $2.3 million. In Lake and Sumner County, Lake County's Boys Ranch was given $5.6 million. Sarasota County, the Sarasota County Coalition for Families and Children was given $9.5 million. And in Palm Beach County, an unspecified private for-profit company was given an undisclosed amount of money. Despite spending $27.5 million of disclosed money, after 2 years, 4 of the 5 private test programs were abysmal failures. But despite these failures, Florida decided to press on and privatize all of the foster care system.
Privatization was just an experiment. I need to be very, very clear about that. And it was one that's never been proven to be successful to this date. In 1999, after Governor Bush was elected, it became his mission to entirely privatize the state of Florida and to create this system of care that was managed by these private entities.
Florida was the first state to fully privatize child welfare. When that happened, private companies sprung up across the state. Those companies are called CBCs, and the Department of Children and Families' function then is to monitor that they provide those services.
The new plan was for the Department of Children and Families to divide up the state between 17 different CBCs, or lead agencies.
What happened in Florida, as the governor pressed on the privatized, they allowed agencies that had never delivered child welfare services to just be formed and come into existence. They didn't have any assets. They didn't have any experience base. Our Kids was formed, never had any experience in child welfare. ChildNet formed in Broward, no experience in child welfare. CFC formed, no experience in child welfare, and they hired new employees and started operating as new agencies.
When you have a lead agency that's going to provide those services, we were under the assumption that lead agency would be providing those services. Instead, what we find out is the lead agencies in almost every county in the state contract out every single service of child welfare. You need people that are going to recruit foster parents. They contract that out. You have to license, do the background screening of foster parents. That's contracted out. Case managing adoptions, that's contracted out. If there's mental health services that are provided, that's contracted out. Most of them don't even do their in-house case management and know those kids.
Dade County had roughly a $100 million budget for child welfare services. Our Kids was formed. Our Kids hired very expensive officers to run it. Some of these officers were making almost $250,000 a year. And they would have controllers, and they would have attorneys, and they were very, very expensive. Well, they contracted out to case management agencies. Another set of agencies were born. And these folks had very expensive CEOs and chief financial officers and chief information officers and lawyers who became general counsels. And what happened is a huge amount of expense was created in overhead that never existed in the system before.
The push in Tallahassee has been to take those public dollars, tax dollars, and give them to for-profit entities. You come across a lot of problems when you do that, because not only is there a built-in incentive to reduce services, because you've got to make a profit somewhere, and the state never gives anyone enough money to do what they're asked to do. But there's also a transfer of accountability. Seen that happen in the foster care system with the creation of the CBCs, the community-based care councils. It's legislators trying to kick the bucket down the road by blaming an organization that they've transferred money to and absolving themselves of any responsibility when problems occur, when abuses occur.
What happens when a child is harmed? And we say, something's got to be done. Who are we going to hold accountable? And then you've got the finger pointing to everyone else. Well, we only provided this service. Well, we only provided that service. Well, we're not responsible for this, and we're not responsible for that.
These companies are getting their funding from the government. They're being completely funded by taxpayer money. There's a lot of money flowing through this system. And what's crazy is that for the amount of money, you're not getting good care. There is a serious lack of oversight and serious lack of consequences by the people who run these facilities. And there's really a wall of silence around all types of minor cases. And the only time they share information is when something bad happens, when there's some type of crisis scenario, when there's a resident who dies. That's when all of a sudden everybody gets involved.
One of the biggest stories involving the Department of Children and Families was the Miami Herald's expose on the death of 477 foster care children. A story so big, the department's wall of silence could not contain it.
One of the things that's concerned us for many years with regard to DCF is the lack of transparency. We had to fight for a good 3 years to get all of the records that we needed to publish Innocence Lost. One of the things we found was that over a 10-year period, about 477 children whose families were known to DCF subsequently died. One of the things they did 80 times, resulting in the death of a child, was they came upon a family that was in crisis, and instead of intervening with that family meaningfully, they asked the parents to sign what was called the safety plan. And these were essentially written pledges to be better parents. Pledges by usually the father to stop being violent toward a child. Pledges by one or both parents to stop being drug addicts. And those things we found, and DCF really already knew, were no more valuable than the paper they were written on.
You want to be able to kind of pin somebody with the blame for this, and so you keep going to these agencies with these tough questions, and they basically, push you off on somebody else, because that's the way that the system has been privatized, and it's very diffuse in terms of who's responsible for what.
Without accountability, and with massive amounts of money allotted for childcare eaten up by paychecks for corporate CEOs, these lead agencies had to find an inexpensive, efficient way to house large numbers of children. This led to the group home.
One of the other failures of privatization in Florida has been the complete and total absence of appropriate placements to meet the needs of children. We see horrible examples of overuse of shelters and group home placements.
I am standing in front of the group home that I aged out of when I was 17. Life here was hectic, it was crazy. There were fights all the time. Staff used to pin kids against each other. Staff used to try to fight the kids. It was exactly the type of situation you would not want your child to be in. I was removed from my home when I was 2 years old. I was with my great-grandma. My uncle, he was displaying himself to my 2 older sisters, and when we'd take a shower, he'd watch us bathe.
So we removed this child from this traumatic, bad situation.
The child's been horrifically abused or neglected, bad enough to be removed. We put them in a place called a group home, where you've got shift workers that come in every 8 hours. You've got a car that's not a car, it's a big van that's got the name of the company on it. You'd have no privacy, and all of that is not creating a safe, stable, nurturing environment.
There were a lot of fights. All the kids were angry. People stole things. I barely had any type of possessions because they were all gone. I mean, if it was something nice, you didn't have it for very long.
We're at Great Oaks Village. It's a group home from ages 5 to 18. I lived here approximately on and off 10 years. Life here, majority of the time it was hell. The police were here almost every day. They'll be literally waiting if you're late from school, if you refuse to come home from supper, or if you just refuse to get out of bed, they'll call the police as if the police were your mom and dad when they're supposed to be your caretakers.
The police were here every day. It got to the point where they knew our names by heart.
When you saw the cops, it was like run or, go hide, or we were just really afraid because we knew that meant that you weren't going to be there for very long and they were taking you somewhere.
Privatized group homes rely heavily on police intervention and calling 911 for help with situations that most parents could easily handle. Often, a single group home will have more than 300 911 calls a year. Ashtavia's group home was actually on the same grounds as a juvenile detention facility.
When we were bad, for any reason, the police were called and they would take us from here and they would bring us to jail. And instead of us sending us to our room, they would just bring us here. Every day, kids in my shelter were thrown in jail just for doing things that typical kids do on a daily basis.
Not only do the group homes fail to provide a safe, secure place for foster kids to grow up, they also cost more. In 2014, $81.7 million was spent to house 2,200 children in group homes, money the children say they never saw.
One of the things we've seen with privatization is much less money reaches the child now than it did before.
Caring for children is a business. Business has a bottom line. These places are paid per day per child at an average of, $100, $120 a day per child. When you have empty beds, you have staff to pay. You've got to pay your staff. The staff doesn't go down. You've got to pay. Those kids are the dollars that you've got to get in.
When I learned the numbers and the percentages and the statistics in foster care, I felt like we were just like black market items, like we're just kids they throw out on the market, and I felt degraded as a young man, because here I am thinking they have our best interests, but really we're just numbers and percentages to them.
Far too often these kids are placed in placements, not because that place has the specific services that that child needs, that's the best placement for them. It's because they got the empty bed to place that child in.
It's like we're money to them. Like you see, like Mr. Gary would come to work in his Corvette while all of us don't even have food in our fridges.
I remember one group home, there was literally a bolt lock on the fridge. That lock was always there unless we had a visitor, which meant that we went some nights without eating.
As group home children went without eating, executives at ChildNet, the CBC in Broward County, found other ways to spend state money.
In the spring of 2015, the Inspector General of DCF released a scathing report on ChildNet. It found that there was a high-level employee, the chief financial officer named Deepak Parekh, who had engaged in a number of activities the Inspector General criticized. The whistleblower in that case had alerted ChildNet to these activities. ChildNet looked into the allegations, determined that nothing was wrong, and did nothing. The whistleblower later made allegations to the governor's office. They found a host of inappropriate activities. Park had asked several of his underlings to perform tasks for him that had nothing to do with the protection of children. He had workers paint his house, change his locks, get his oil changed. He was accused of sexually harassing female workers that he supervised. Park had actually had some of his underlings take his car apart to look for a global positioning device that he feared his wife had placed there in order to spy on him. The Inspector General report said that not just Park, but several executives at ChildNet had behaved as if state taxpayer money was their own piggy bank. We have since learned that the whistleblower was fired.
Parek left ChildNet before these allegations became public. But his suspect spending reveals one of the system's biggest flaws. Lots of money for those on the top, and very little for the kids on the bottom.
The allowance that I received in the group home was about $13 a week. And to my knowledge, they get $100 per day per kid. And with over 50 kids in the group home that I was in, I mean, do the math.
I had to buy my own soap at one point. Like, I had to use like my allowance. Like, they gave us like maximum $12 like every week.
If you did one thing wrong that week, you wouldn't get an allowance.
Hibiscus especially would look for any and any reason to hold your allowance. So there would be like maybe like 3 months in a row you wouldn't get paid anything. So, I mean, I could see why some people would fall into human trafficking.
After the romancing would begin, the girls were manipulated into working for E-Nasty and quote-unquote his boys.
These are the mugshots of 4 men who prosecutors say used teenage girls in foster care as prostitutes. Eric Earl, also known as E-Nasty, was the ringleader.
These pimps and traffickers are going to go for the easiest ones. They're no longer picking them up in a van. They are now going to the hot spots where foster kids hang out. And so group homes are a huge target. We've got peers recruiting peers.
Sex trafficking of minors is a major problem in group homes, but despite the fact that this is commonly known by both staff and caseworkers, underage girls and boys are able to easily leave the home at all hours of the day and night. Once gone, sexual predators are not far behind.
We're at the hotel across the street from the group home. The guys would bring the girls here. They buy them alcohol, buy them marijuana. They bring them in a room. They get drunk, they get high, whatever they wanted to do. So our caseworkers weren't providing for us. The girls felt that the only way they were going to get anything is if they got it themselves. The prostitutes range from 12 to 17. Some girls prostitute for money, others prostitute for food, others prostitute for drugs. Some prostitute because they think that the person they're with loves them. And being a foster care kid, most of these girls don't get a lot of love.
No one's knowing the double lives that they're living, and that they could run out and sneak out and they could go across the street and make some money for sex to get what they need and to take care of the stuff that is not provided by the system. And it's become normalized.
Prosecutors say the girls would get $40 for the sex acts. The big question, though, is how did they gain access, these suspects, to homes that are supervised by the Department of Children and Families?
I think that's a much more complex question than can be answered in a couple of words.
Sex traffickers look for these children. They look for children that are vulnerable. They look for children who aren't attached to others. They look for children who are hungry for someone to give them love and affection. And so they know to target some of these group homes. These kids in these group homes are targeted because they're a perfect mark for a sex trafficker.
The girls will come in, like, you can smell it on them, like, you know that's what they've been doing. The staff, they'll look at them, they'll just give another staff a look, and then they'll just, like, leave it alone. Like, if you're a staff and you're trying to help these kids, then why you won't say nothing?
We aren't doing any sort of justice to these children, putting them in homes where there is no understanding or education on what sexual abuse is and how they are prime suspects and targets for human trafficking.
An investigation into this prostitution ring revealed the girls were recruited in the group home while under staff supervision.
The kids that are put in there because of abusive situations. So the majority of them, that gateway's already been opened. They've already had the sexual violation. They already are boundaryless with what is theirs and what's not. And typically the girls that we have worked with have been re-abused in some sort of setting through foster care.
The road that we're on is called the runaway trail. Sometimes men or women, they'll see us and they'll pretty much start picking us up. And then from there, like, it'll be either exchanged for sex, money, drugs, whatever the situation may be.
What happens is within 48 hours, statistically, 80% of runaways are approached and coerced by a trafficker or pimp into the sex trade. And then once they're in the sex trade, it's typically a life of being sold 15 to 40 times a day for up to 7 years.
A lot of the time, people will lurk around because they knew the group home was right here and it was just easy pickup.
You'll see in the newspaper or on TV these stings where law enforcement has rescued all these children. And I sit back, and now that I'm behind the scenes a lot, I will ask, where are these children going? Because I know now that there aren't enough places for these children to go, that they're either going back to mom and dad, back to foster homes, back to places where there isn't the education, there's not the therapy, there's not the training to stop this cycle of sex trafficking. And so even when we're rescuing children, we are not really rescuing them unless they have a safe place to go.
The problem isn't just lack of supervision, lack of real activities, but it's really, the problem is a lack of a connection. That child needs that connection. That's what they're looking for when they're out there, and that's what they get from those sex traffickers.
This is my DCF file. This is basically my life. A whole bunch of paperwork. I was born into the system because my mom was a drug addict, so therefore I was born with cocaine in my system. I was taken away at birth. I was born at 5 p.m. I didn't know that. When I was about 1, my maternal aunt got me, and then a lot of abuse took place at that home.
For the first few years of her life, Angel was passed between her abusive aunt, her abusive mother, and her sister. Then, at the age of 7, she re-entered the foster care system after being hit by a car.
This is my closet. This is where I had to hide at. This is a summary of a psychological evaluation that was done on me when I was 10. Angel appears to be experiencing some gender confusion. I realized that I was gay actually before I moved here. Being here, it was hard. Same as how it's hard for it to come out right now, it was just that much harder being here because of the simple fact that I had to dress like a girl, even though everybody knew that I hated it. The foster parent remarked on Angel's style of dress like a boy and indicated that she had been encouraging Angel to dress like a girl. She related that Angel has problems with her gender identity. She related that her religious beliefs indicated that Angel's style of dress and possibly wanting to be a boy are wrong. I ran into this a lot in foster care. She wasn't the only foster parent, it was a lot of foster parents. How would you feel being brought here in the middle of the night? I kept asking to see my sister, but nobody couldn't tell me anything because we didn't leave the campus.
As Angel began life in the group home shelter, memories of her former life and of her sister began to fade.
It's like somebody just up and gone out of your life for good when you're so used to them being there. And when they're taken away from you or you're taken away from that person, it's like their memories start to fade. Their voice starts to fade, and you don't want that to fade. And that's basically what the shelter was doing. It was making the memories go away because I was 24/7 there. Always there, different people just there. They weren't trying to ask me, hey, do you want to see your sister? What's wrong? What can we do for you? How can we help you? How can you not be quiet? How can we make you talk? How can we make you interact? How? Instead of asking that, it was, okay, since you don't want to do what I asked you to do, you're going to your room. They grab me by the shoulder, they want to yank away. That's when they would restrain me. I hid behind the door at the shelter, and they called the cops. With me acting out, they couldn't take me to jail, so they Baker Acted me.
A Baker Act is a section of Florida law that allows police to detain a person who poses a threat to themselves or others for a period of 72 hours, while their mental health can be assessed. But in a foster care system, it is used as a temporary babysitter to remove children from a home by a staff that is untrained and unwilling to deal with an emotional child.
The use of the police should be the last resort. When you see police interventions to the numbers that have been reported, it instantly says that something's not working.
When a child acts up in a foster care home, almost always the police are called. The police, with very few options available to them, escort them to a Baker acting unit. The children are observed for a period of 72 hours, then sent back to another group home. A cycle that continually repeats, sending children in and out of psychiatric facilities.
If some kid comes to me and has been Baker acted for the third or fourth, fifth time, the question is why? What's going on? It means the system's not working, the diagnosis is wrong, the interventions are not there, the preventions are not there, something is really afoul.
Once at the Baker Action Unit, the children, who can be as young as 5 years old, are treated like any other suspect brought in.
Everything is very bright white. They'll take your shoestrings, they'll make you strip naked, cough, squat at a young age, and felt very uncomfortable. Strip? Why am I stripping? Cough. Open your vagina. And then a woman with gloves came in and did this. What are you doing? I'm a little girl. The doctor asked a lot of questions, like, do I want to kill myself? Do I hear voices? And it's like, no, I want to go home. I want to go to my sister's house. I want to go to my sister's house. How come every time I run away, you keep Baker acting me and send me to this crazy home when all I'm doing is just trying to see my sister? But when I tell you or I ask you, you guys don't want to listen, and nor have you guys asked me. And it's gotten to a point where I don't want to speak anymore. I feel like my voice is useless to you guys. This is a summary of how many homes I've been in like a 2-year expansion. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 2 years and 18 homes.
When these kids start acting out, and they'll act out, it's not pleasant. Then the group home says, well, that's it, we're done with that behavior, and we're gonna ship them to another place. Where do they go? Another group home.
If it's saying 2004 to 2003, then I was only like 12 and 13. My foster parent got a phone call from my aunt, and my aunt spoke to me, and she was apologizing for the horrible things she did to me, and told me that my mom had died earlier that day. And it was like, you knew when she was gonna pass away because she was in hospice. Why didn't you call me? I was devastated. I wanted to go to my sister's house, and when I tried to leave out the door, the foster parent tried to stop me. And she restrained me, and I maneuvered out of it and ran out the door. And at that point, I got arrested for assault and battery and destruction of property. And I think at that point is when they was ready to throw me in a SIP program.
With the death of her mother and not being able to see her sister, Angel began to act out. This led her to be placed in one of the system's most notorious mental health facilities.
CATS is the Center for Adolescent Treatment Services, which is a facility for troubled youth. It's run by a nonprofit company called Citrus Health Services, which is a healthcare provider out of Hialeah. Got a call from a public defender in the Broward office who deals a lot with juvenile offenders. And he told me about some troubling behavior that he had heard about at this facility, which is out in Pembroke Pines. And it turned out there had been a riot at this facility for young girls and boys. And the police had come, and it was a whole big deal, and the girl had told the public defender that during kind of the whole melee at the center, a police officer had punched her in the face.
What was so unusual involving Citrus is that our office was appointed to represent the child for battery on a law enforcement officer. So the state of Florida saw that video and thought it was wise to charge that child with battering that officer.
But kind of what was more troubling, I think, to him and then to me as I began kind of investigating it was just the general craziness that was going on that day at the facility, in which, according to this girl and other girls, was kind of standard practice there, like girls being tied to the bed, 4-point restraints, face down.
I didn't have any rights here.
I was force-fed pills, meaning crushed up pills inside of a yogurt, and was forced to eat that until they told me it was all gone. And if I did not finish that, I was getting tranquilized and being strapped down to a bed in a seclusion room.
One of the most troubling was being administered kind of willy-nilly psychotropic medication to knock them out. I mean, girls were talking about getting tied down to beds and shot up with syringes full of medicine they didn't even know what it was, and then they'd wake up hours later. The girls started calling it booty juice because they were being shot in their back end or their rear with it.
The manner in which they were doing it and the frequency by which they were restraining these young girls was troubling. I was pretty shocked to learn that you would treat not only mentally ill individuals this way, but that you would treat young girls this way, many of which had already sustained or suffered significant abuse.
The overprescription of psychotropic medication was not just at CATS, but can be found all across the foster care system.
Order authorizing psychotropic medicine. Seroquel, Risperdal, and how do you say that? Trileptal. And then right after that, they switched it to Risperdal and Zoloft. Yeah, Risperdal was the little red pill and Zoloft was the white pill. I used to hate them both.
One of the side effects of all the medication was weight gain, pushing Angel over 250 pounds. But with no one advocating for her, she was unable to do anything but continue to take the drugs.
When it came to medication, when it was medicine time, they would crunch the medicine up inside of a yogurt. You have 2 minutes to sit there, eat that whole yogurt, and then leave. If you do not eat that yogurt, you're going to be restrained and strapped down to the bed. You're going to be forced to medication and then also a needle in your butt.
And they held me down as a child to give me that needle. They suppressed me with medication. Everything is medication is going to make this feel better.
It's like everything's clicking, but I'm used to everything just clicking like that. My brain works like this to me, but it goes from working like this to...
The Government Accountability Office found that 48% of kids in group home facilities were being given psychotropic medication, often at higher doses than FDA guidelines.
I've been on Zoloft, I've been on Adderall, I've been on Effexor, I've been on Trazodone.
I was 9 years old at the time, and they put me on, I think, Ritalin and Paxil or something like that. One was for, hyperactivity, and the other was for depression, but they never told me what the reason why I was getting these drugs.
What was strange to me was every kid in my group home, every kid in the home I was living in, just always had something wrong with them. And I always thought that was weird. I was like, how is that possible that all of us are not normal?
The disproportionate number of these kids who need medications, and some pretty nasty, let me put it this way, some pretty high doses at times.
I was on 23 something pills a day, 8 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, another 4 or 5 at 4 p.m., and then 7 or 8 at night.
But there can't be that many kids that are that bad all the time. The numbers are wrong. So it's saying that the system is not working.
All of those drugs, about 23 plus or something I was taking in Sandy Pines, left me with a severely damaged central nervous system. I guess afterwards I got diagnosed with a motor tic disorder.
And at CATS, these drugs would often be administered by an untrained staff.
Why are staff members repeatedly and continually using a sedative to control the behavior of youth within the facility? And many of those questions were answered by the quality of staff, and the training of the staff seemed to suggest that it was substandard across all measures.
Are residents routinely drugged unconscious?
Sir, I'll have to, defer to you speaking with our folks at our main center, okay?
Well, you run the place.
I do, but I have to get back to my clients now, so thank you very much.
There's no accountability in this system. DCF can say, well, talk to ChildNet. ChildNet can say, well, talk to Citrus. Citrus can say, well, we need to talk to ACA. They don't care how they look in the end of the day, because it's really difficult to lose that contract.
It was so disappointing to see the anemic response from the state of Florida when it came into protecting these children that were in that facility.
Had it not been for the defense of this 14-year-old girl taken into the foster care system after the death of both of her parents, the condition and treatment inside this facility would have continued to go on completely unnoticed. After finding multiple violations of patients' rights, the state fined Citrus $10,000, but settled for $9,500. Today, state money continues to flow into CATS and Citrus Health Services, and children are still being held behind these closed doors like prison inmates.
It's like incarceration with training wheels, basically, is what they're going through.
No youth deserve to grow up in this place right here, aging out of this place, even spending any type of teenage or even childhood-like years in here. Why? Because this is getting us prepared to be incarcerated.
You know, they've been abused their whole life. They've been in terrible situations their whole life. Honestly, like, CATS is probably just one stop on many stops that they'll make through the system. As children, I feel like they just take it as a status quo of their lives, which is really terrible, and it really is an indictment on all of us, you know, as a society for allowing that to go on and allowing these children to feel that way.
Fortunately for Angel, she found a placement where she wasn't forced to be someone else, and her constant acting out stopped.
When she came here, she had nothing, if she wants to be a boy, nothing that they bought for her or to make her look presentable. Everything she had was big and raggedy and something that she had got from somebody else or whatever. So the next day after she got here, I took her shopping. Me and her went shopping. Bought everything boy. Boy underwear, boy cologne, boy undershirts, everything. So she loved it that. I think that's too what made her really turn around and want to do good and stay here, because I treated her like she should have been treated.
With the proper respect and nurturing at the new foster parents' home, Angel stopped taking the drugs, and the weight soon began to come off.
It was her showing that she cared, and it was one out of a million people that I had in my life. And the simple fact that she showed me how to love and how to care. And that's where I learned to be the happy person that you guys see today.
In the end, Angel's issues were not solved with shots, therapists, restraints, and reports, but by a simple home where she was allowed to be herself. Unfortunately, the abuse she endured through the system has stuck with her to this day.
I don't want to be nowhere inside. I don't. I just want to be outside and just enjoy the fresh air, look at the stars, because I love looking at the stars. It's sad to say, but that's something that foster care has done to me.
When Carlos came into our home, he was about 3 years old. He had his siblings, 2 brothers and 1 sister. They were originally taken from their biological parents due to neglect and abuse. They were separated into foster homes, and in an effort to keep them together, my wife and I decided to take them into our home and eventually adopt them. Carlos came in with severe issues as far as learning disabilities, including hoarding food. He would bust holes in the wall. Eventually, it got to the point where he was a threat to himself and the family. And so we felt that we would try to get him help. We did not have the funds to do it ourselves, so we called DCF and asked them for their assistance. And they came into the house and interviewed and so forth, and they deemed that he was indeed a threat to himself and the family, and that they would remove him and get him the needed help. He moved from place to place. Eventually, they put him in what was referred to as a therapeutic foster home. While Carlos was in the therapeutic foster home, he was sexually abused by the foster parent son.
I was in a room and I was playing with my toys. So then I came out of the room. Then Vince, and he came out, was like, shut the door. I don't want you to shut the door. I was like, why? And then he was like, just shut the door. And then when we was in the room, he told me to take off my whole clothes and stuff. And I got mad. I didn't want to do that. So then he forced me. He pushed me on the bed, and then started raping me and stuff, doing all different kinds of stuff. And then I didn't like this.
We suspected the abuse was happening. The police and DCF investigated, but they said that he was lying, that it wasn't true, that they didn't believe him, that he'd make up stories. And so he stayed in that environment because of that. And the abuse continued to happen. So you can imagine the frustration when they allow it to continue to happen and put him back into the home. One day his guardian ad litem was visiting the home, and he explained to her the situation at the same time that the therapist was at the home who did not believe Carlos originally. And because of the garden ad litem believed him, followed up with it, he was immediately taken from the home.
After Carlos was removed from the home, another child was placed there and was sexually assaulted that first weekend. This complaint, filed on behalf of that child, said the DCF had failed to adequately investigate Carlos' claim and had for 1 year known about the inappropriate behavior and continued to place children in the home. Yet no one was ever held accountable for what happened. Not the case manager, not the therapeutic foster home, not the therapist, no one.
The doctors mentioned because of the previous things that he was suffering with as he grew older, it was going to get worse, in which they did. And they advised he needed to be in a long-term facility where he could get help, and that's where he is at present.
I entered the foster care system when I was about 3 years old, and my brothers were aged 2 and 1, and that was due to neglect from our birth mother. We were in a variety of group homes. Me and my brothers weren't always together.
In the case of the Garcia-Bengochea boys, they moved around. It was like a carousel of foster homes. And some of them were very abusive, both emotionally, physically. There was one home where 2 of the boys were disciplined by being put out in a chicken coop at night. The last home that the 3 boys were together in was a home of Hector Rosa, who was a serial child molester. One DCF caseworker testified that one day she took James, the youngest boy, out for ice cream. When they came back and she was escorting him to the front door, about halfway, he just fell on his knees, grabbed her around her legs and started screaming, "Please don't take me back there." She took him back and left him there, and when she testified, it was crying about it. It was that bad. By the time they got out of that house, they didn't trust anybody. The Garcia-Bengocheas, who are a wonderful couple, they came to the department and said they were interested in adopting 1 child, possibly 2, and the department convinced them that these 3 boys they would love. So the department concealed all of the important records regarding the natural history that the children had had with their mother, as well as the revolving abusive foster care that they received in the other homes.
I would do this thing called shutting down. I would just become a wall, and people could talk, people could say stuff to me, people could do whatever, and I wouldn't make any facial expression. You wouldn't be able to tell that I heard what you said. I would just sit there like a stone wall.
I mean, we're talking about 5, 6-year-olds, 4-year-olds. I mean, this was just not expected behavior.
We would have nightmares. We slept on bunk beds, and it was a metal bunk bed, and the metal beds would creak. The creaking of the beds triggered memory to Mr. Hector coming in and having sexual stuff with us, horrible stuff.
When the boys were removed from the home, even though there were signs of abuse, I mean, obvious signs, and we proved it in the civil litigation, they put other children into that home. There was a young girl who was placed into that home after the boys left. She was sexually abused horribly. Her abuse is what ultimately led to the arrest and subsequent investigation of Hector Rosa as a foster father. The Garcia-Bengochea case was such a terrible case, factually, for the department, involving the way the children were handled, the fraud that was perpetrated on the adoptive parents, that they did not want this case to see the light of day. When we finally got to the courthouse steps, they wanted to mediate, and they settled the case for $10 million, most of which the money was going to go to the boys and special needs trusts. I've had 5 cases against the department that it either paid multi-million dollars as a result of the injuries that it was directly responsible for, or it's facing, you know, $1 million claim. And in none of those cases was anybody fired. And to my knowledge, in none of those cases was anybody even disciplined. But I know nobody was fired.
There seems to be a consensus among my sources that there is an overall lack of accountability and oversight within these state agencies that care for and are supposed to protect children. When some of these agencies get caught doing things they're not supposed to do, they will retreat into greater lack of transparency.
What I'm looking at is supposed to be my dependency records while I was in care, but when I opened the mail and started going through them, it's not what I received. My dependency records are life under 18. That's what I requested. I was born into care. My mom is considered a crackhead. My grandmother had custody of my sister and I. She started physically abusing us, and when things got to where she was going to be placed under investigation and we were going to be taken from her, she was going to face criminal charges, she just decided that she would just put us on a Greyhound with a relative and send us to Florida. There's nothing in here about who I am, who my sister is. There's no police record, investigation record on when I was sexually abused. My sister and I had the best relationship. My sister was my best friend. She was all I had when I came from New York. We were placed into a home immediately together. I noticed things wasn't right when my sister told me I don't want to go back to our house.
And why didn't she want to go back home?
Our foster father.
And why?
He touched her and me, and I wasn't going to let him touch her. You could touch me, but you're not going to touch her. And he told me if I told anybody, he was going to kill me. I'm telling you, we need to get out of there. This man raped me. And you tell me, stop imagining things that are not there or happening. They send people in the home, you know, and after the investigation was done, they removed me and kept my sister there and put me in a crisis nursery. I feel like they're hiding something. They're trying to cover up something. To whom it may concern, please excuse Ashtavia from school due to her receiving her treatment. Thank you. And the treatment that I was receiving was 8 hours of Cytoxin. It's chemo. Ashtavia was withdrawn from school on 9/16/2009. Prior to that, she had horrible attendance and used the drama in her life as excuses and played the victim role. The day this was written, I was in the hospital. I just had open heart surgery. And then to be diagnosed with lupus SLE on top of it, and all they can say is that you're lying. The only thing that's in here that Ashtavia is a liar. Ashtavia is a manipulator. There's not even a birth certificate. Everything I've ever gone through has never happened. I'm a preschool teacher, and the reason why I'm doing it is because, like, I remember when I was in school, I just felt that nobody really connected with me.
So many kids that have spent a lot of time in care have a very common feeling that they want to help change the system. Just over 10 years ago, my organization started a youth advocacy organization called Florida Youth Shine. These kids are 13 to 24. They're in care or have aged out of care. They live through the system. They know it better than anyone else, but yet they've not had a voice.
These kids are in here getting raped, they're getting beat up, they're in here doing drugs. You have these people who you've placed in charge over these kids to protect them, and they're the ones who are violating them.
Every single year, Florida Youth Shine identifies the issues that they want to focus on. This year, it is eliminating the need for large group homes because they don't feel safe, nurtured, or stable in those placements.
And they wonder, like, why the statistics are so high for kids in foster care being in jail, because that's all that they're used to.
Another issue is once they get on and age out of care, they can end up homeless. They can end up out in the street.
The last day of my court day when I aged out, I told them that I had no place to go, I had no resources, and their response to me was I should go to the homeless shelter. I cried and I cried, and I really, honestly, I could never understand how could a person tell somebody that. How do you have the heart to even be in child welfare, to be in social services, to serve any oppressed population and make careless decisions on another person's behalf?
For kids in foster care being in prison and going to jail, it's because that's all that they're used to. They're living in an institution who is constantly controlling them, constantly telling them, okay, it's lights out at 10. That sounds like prison to me. Oh, we're gonna go down and do random counts and random searches, make sure you don't have any weapons or contraband on you. That sounds like prison, and that becomes life for them. And once you try to put them in a normal environment, it's like, oh my God, what is this? This is not normal. Being told what to do all the time is normal. Being locked in a room all the time is normal. Being searched is normal. I have to go out and I have to find that. And the only balance that they can find is in prison, because that's all that they're used to.
Florida Youth Shine's outreach to Florida legislators is one way the former foster care children are trying to improve the system. Another is by volunteering at local community centers, such as Handy.
This place is kind of like a sanctuary for me. This is where I grew up. This is the program that helped me. So I want to help them help as many people as possible. The reason I do it is because I grew up in the system and there wasn't that many people that did care. And the few that did, I chose to kind of follow in their footsteps and care about people that are also in the system, which would be all the kids here. I just don't want anyone to feel like they don't have someone there, like I did.
Another bright spot in the system is the Community Partnership for Children, the lead agency in Daytona Beach.
We operate through a social worker lens here. We don't operate through a business lens or an attorney lens.
One of the things that makes this lead agency effective is not falling into the shortcomings of other lead agencies, like avoiding out-of-county placements.
We at all costs keep the kids in county here, so they're still in the same school, they're still hopefully around their same friends.
Avoiding multiple placements.
The right placement is important for us. We have the highest rate in Florida of first placement, last placement.
Avoiding group homes.
88% of the time, when we place a child the first time, they do not move from that place until they go home or they're adopted.
Avoiding large CEO salaries.
Our corporate overhead is 3.6%, which means over 96% of our dollars go to direct services for children, and we're proud of that.
Limiting the contracting out of services.
When we contract with our providers, they have to submit a budget.
Through the hundreds of millions of dollars handed to privatized companies for care across the state, the few successes all have the same thing in common: a safe, stable environment for the child. And the best way to achieve that is still the traditional foster family.
In my opinion, what the system needs is tons and tons and tons of great foster families.
These kids, they don't know what to do, and they act out trying to deliver their emotions. And so many of them, when they're put in a good foster home, it's like somebody turned one switch off and turned on another switch. It's unbelievable.
When you have these foster parents that are advocating for the kids, the system just shuts them down.
When you're working for them, and you have to do what? Follow their rules. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a foster parent anymore, because they had too many rules and too many things that I didn't agree with.
You know, I don't think my husband and I would ever foster again, because it was a constant battle against the system.
Foster parents feel threatened that they're going to lose the children in their care if they can make too many waves. And so either they acquiesce or they give up.
And when the best foster parents give up, the entire system is doomed to fail. These kids weren't special cases. They weren't the worst of the worst. They were just kids in bad situations, pulled into a broken system. A system that abuses state funds, crams children into group homes, and when they act out, drugs and restrains them. A system that needs change.
To find out where to go, I might end up taking this long, dark road. through the pitches and the rain. I think I'll make it out someday. I got to find out who I am. I got to know where I fit in. I try so